My name is Effie. I'm 67 years old, and until last year, I thought I knew what family meant. After 45 years of marriage to my Harold, he passed away leaving our two children a $54 million inheritance. I never imagined that money would turn them against me so completely that they'd throw their own mother out into the rain. But life has a funny way of coming full circle. If you're watching this video, I'd love to know your thoughts on what family loyalty means today. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next part of my story about teaching my children the true value of gratitude. I met Harold when I was just 20 years old. He was 23, brilliant, ambitious, and had the kindest smile I'd ever seen. We married within a year, and those 45 years together were the greatest blessing of my life. Harold started in technology before it was the giant industry it is today. He had a vision for software that would revolutionize how businesses handled their logistics, and he was right. Our home in Boston was modest at first. We struggled like any young couple pinching pennies and dreaming big. I worked as a teacher while Harold built his company from our garage. Those early years were tough, but sweet. We'd stay up late talking about the future, planning what we'd do when success came our way. Daniel came along 2 years into our marriage. He was always his father's son, analytical, sharp, with a mind for numbers. Amanda followed 3 years later. She was charismatic from the moment she could talk, always knowing just what to say to get what she wanted. I loved my children fiercely. I gave up my teaching career to raise them to support Harold as he built what would become Harrington Tech Solutions. By the time Daniel was in high school, the company had grown exponentially. We moved into a beautiful colonial home in Brookline, one of Boston's most prestigious neighborhoods. Harold insisted on putting my name on all the assets. "This is our success, Effie, not just mine," he would say. Daniel followed in his father's footsteps. He got his MBA from Wharton and came back to work for the family business. He was brilliant with finances, helping to grow the company even further. Amanda studied public relations and joined the company too, handling our corporate image and client relationships. On paper, we were the perfect American success story, a family business where everyone had their place. Thomas Bennett was Harold's best friend since college and became our family's financial advisor. He was at our dinner table every Sunday for years. His wife Laura and I would laugh about being corporate widows while our husbands discussed business late into the night. Thomas was the only person Harold trusted completely outside of family. As the children grew older and the business expanded, I noticed subtle changes. Daniel and Amanda would exchange glances when I spoke at business dinners. They started having private meetings with Harold that I wasn't invited to. I told myself it was natural. They were adults with their own relationships with their father. Still, I felt something shifting. Harold worked too hard. I begged him to slow down to take care of his heart after his doctor warned him about his high blood pressure. "Just a few more deals," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "Then we'll travel, see the world together." We never got that chance. Harold was on a business trip to Chicago when it happened, a massive heart attack in his hotel room. By the time they found him, it was too late. I got the call at 3 a.m. and my world collapsed. 45 years of love, partnership, and shared dreams, gone in an instant. I remember sitting on the edge of our bed, holding his pillow, unable to comprehend a world without Harold in it. Daniel and Amanda arrived within hours. They hugged me, cried with me, promised they'd take care of everything. In those first raw days of grief, I believed them. Why wouldn't I? They were my children. The funeral was a blur of black suits and sympathetic murmurs. So many people came, business associates, friends, family from across the country. Harold was loved and respected. I stood between Daniel and Amanda as people shared stories of how my husband had changed their lives, given them opportunities, believed in them when no one else would. "Your father built something extraordinary," I whispered to my children as we stood by the casket. "We know Mom," Daniel set his arm around my shoulders, "and we'll protect it for Dad." A week after the funeral, James Wilson, Harold's attorney for over 30 years, called us for the reading of the will. I wasn't concerned about the details. Harold and I had discussed everything. We had no secrets. The conference room at Wilson's law firm felt too formal, too cold for such an intimate family matter. Daniel sat to my right, Amanda to my left. James adjusted his glasses and began reading. "Being of sound mind and body, I, Harold James Harrington, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." The company and our assets were valued at $54 million. Harold had divided everything. Clearly, Daniel would receive 40% of the company shares, Amanda 40% as well. I would retain 20% and the right to live in our family home for the rest of my life. There were specific instructions about charitable donations, about taking care of old employees who had been with us from the beginning. "Mom, you don't need to worry about anything," Amanda said as we left the attorney's office. "We'll handle the business side. You just focus on yourself." "That's right," Daniel added. "Dad would want you to take time to grieve." Their concern seemed genuine then. I was still numb with loss, grateful to have my children looking out for me. The first hint that something was wrong came 3 weeks after the funeral at the first official board meeting. Daniel had scheduled it without telling me. When I arrived at the conference room, everyone looked surprised to see me. "Mom, you didn't have to come," Amanda said, rising from her chair. "We know how difficult this must be." "I want to be involved," I said simply. "Your father would expect it." The meeting proceeded, but I noticed how Daniel and Amanda had already prepared a complete restructuring plan for the company. They talked about modernizing and aggressive expansion, terms Harold had always been cautious about. "We need to move quickly," Daniel explained to the board. "The market won't wait for us to be sentimental." After the meeting, I tried to discuss my concerns with Daniel. "Your father built this company carefully with relationships at its core. We shouldn't rush changes." "Mom," he said with a patience that felt patronizing. "Business has changed since Dad started. We can't run things like it's still the 1980s. That evening, Amanda came by the house with her husband Jackson. They sat in Harold's study, a room I could barely enter without crying, and talked about redecorating the company headquarters. "The wood paneling has to go," Amanda declared. "It's so outdated." That wood paneling had been hand-picked by Harold when we finally could afford proper offices. Each panel represented a milestone in our journey. "Perhaps we should wait a bit before making cosmetic changes," I suggested. Amanda and Jackson exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. "Mom, we need to present a modern image to clients," Amanda explained slowly, as if I were a child. "First impressions matter in business." I noticed other small changes, too. Daniel brought his new girlfriend, Jennifer, to family dinner. She was at least 15 years younger than him, sleek and ambitious. Throughout the meal, she kept asking pointed questions about the company's client list, about our financial reserves. "You must be so proud of Daniel taking charge," Jennifer said to me. "It must be such a relief not to worry about business matters anymore." I smiled politely, but something cold settled in my stomach. I hadn't surrendered control of anything. Not willingly, at least. That night, I called my oldest friend, Margaret. We'd been roommates in college, and she'd known Harold and me from the beginning. "They're just finding their way," Margaret reassured me. "Grief makes people act strangely sometimes." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe that my children were simply processing their father's death in their own way. But a voice in the back of my mind, a voice that sounded remarkably like Harold's, whispered caution. The first truly hostile family meeting happened 2 months after Harold's death. Daniel had called it to discuss the direction of the company. Thomas was there as our financial advisor, along with Amanda Jackson, and unfortunately, Jennifer. Our first quarter projections are concerning. Daniel began sliding papers across the table. We need to make significant changes. The projections looked fine to me. In fact, considering we'd just lost our founder and CEO, the company was performing remarkably well. These numbers seem solid, I said. What exactly are you concerned about? Daniel's expression tightened. Mom, no offense, but you've never really understood the financial side of the business. I stared at my son in shock. I had managed our family finances for decades. I had helped Harold secure our first business loan when banks wouldn't take a chance on his ideas. I understand numbers perfectly well, I replied evenly. What I don't understand is this sudden need to overhaul a successful business model. Successful? Amanda laughed. Actually laughed. Dad was too cautious. We've been leaving money on the table for years. Thomas cleared his throat uncomfortably. If I may, the conservative approach Harold took is exactly what has kept this company stable through 3 recessions. Jennifer, who had no official role at the company, but was somehow present at this meeting, rolled her eyes. Stable is another word for stagnant. I looked around the table at these people I thought I knew. Harold built this company on relationships and trust. That's our foundation. With all due respect, Mrs. Harrington, Jennifer said, not sounding respectful at all. Harold is gone. The company needs to evolve. After that meeting, things deteriorated rapidly. I began hearing from longtime employees that Daniel and Amanda were making drastic changes. Loyal staff members who had been with us for decades were being pushed out. Client relationships carefully cultivated over years were being tested by aggressive new contract terms. Worse, I discovered that Daniel and Amanda had started telling people I was struggling emotionally since Harold's death. They implied I wasn't thinking clearly, that grief had clouded my judgment. Amanda and Jackson purchased a new mansion in the most exclusive part of Beacon Hill, complete with an indoor swimming pool and wine cellar. When I visited, Amanda gave me a perfunctory tour. It's quite extravagant, I commented, thinking of how Harold and I had waited 20 years before allowing ourselves any real luxury. We deserve it, Amanda said firmly. Dad would have wanted us to enjoy our success. Daniel installed Jennifer as the new marketing director despite her limited experience. When I questioned this decision, he accused me of being jealous. You need to accept that Jennifer is part of my life now, which means she's part of the business. One evening, I discovered that my access to the company's financial accounts had been restricted. When I called Daniel about it, he claimed it was a security update. We're implementing 2-factor authentication, he explained. I'll have it set you up next week. Next week never came. The breaking point was a family dinner at Amanda's new home. Daniel and Jennifer were there along with Jackson and a couple of Amanda's new society friends I'd never met. Mom still insists on making her own bread, Amanda told her friends with an indulgent smile. We keep telling her she can afford to have it delivered now. How quaint, one of the women replied. It's not about affording it, I said. Baking is something I enjoy. Harold always loved my sourdough. Jennifer sighed dramatically. Again, with what Harold would have wanted. You know the company has actually improved its performance since we took over. I questioned before I could stop myself. Daniel jumped in. Jennifer has been instrumental in our new marketing strategy. The conversation moved on, but I felt increasingly isolated in this group of people who were supposedly my family. After dinner, I excused myself to use the restroom. As I passed Amanda's home office, I heard Daniel's voice. We need to do something about Mom's shares, he was saying quietly. She's becoming a problem. I know, Amanda replied. She keeps bringing up Dad like his way of doing things is the only way. Jennifer thinks we should offer to buy her out, give her a comfortable monthly stipend instead. Can we do that? Amanda sounded uncertain. Her 20% is significant, but between the two of us we have 80. We control the company. What if she won't sell? Amanda asked. There was a pause before Daniel responded, his voice lower still. Then we may need to look at other options to sideline her. She's getting older. Maybe it's time to suggest she's not capable of making business decisions anymore. I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. My own children were plotting against me. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. 3 months after Harold's death, Daniel scheduled what he called an important restructuring meeting at the company headquarters. I arrived early, determined to stand my ground. The conference room filled with board members, most of whom I'd known for years, but who now avoided meeting my eyes. Daniel and Amanda entered last, flanked by a lawyer I didn't recognize. "Everyone, this is Patrick Donnelly," Daniel announced. "He'll be handling some new legal arrangements for the company." Thomas frowned. "What happened to James Wilson?" "James is retirement age," Amanda said smoothly. We felt it was time for some new perspectives. James had been our family attorney for decades. He knew every detail of how Harold had built the company, every legal protection we'd put in place. The meeting began with Daniel's presentation about streamlining operations. The proposals involved selling off several divisions. Harold had carefully developed divisions that weren't the most profitable but provided job security for hundreds of employees. "These changes will maximize shareholder value," Daniel concluded. "At what cost to our people?" I asked. Harold promised those employees security. Jennifer, who somehow had a seat at the board table, sighed loudly. "Business isn't charity, Mrs. Harrington." "Effie," I corrected her. "My name is Effie, and no business isn't charity, but it can be ethical." Patrick Donnelly cleared his throat and distributed folders to everyone present. "We've prepared a proposal for Mrs. Harrington to consider." Inside my folder was a document outlining a simplified ownership structure. They wanted me to surrender my 20% ownership stake in exchange for a monthly stipend. "This would relieve you of any business responsibilities," Patrick explained, "while ensuring your financial security." "You want me to give up my shares in the company Harold and I built together?" I looked directly at my children. "Why?" "Mom, it's for your own good," Amanda said. "The stress isn't healthy for you." "We've seen how upset you get at these meetings," Daniel added. "This way, you can just enjoy your life while you dismantle everything your father created." I couldn't keep the anger from my voice. "We're improving what Dad created." Daniel snapped his pleasant facade, cracking. He was holding the company back with his old-fashioned ideas. The meeting devolved from there. When I refused to sign anything, Jennifer accused me of being selfish. "Don't you want your children to succeed?" "Success built on betrayal isn't success at all," I replied, gathering my things to leave. "You're being dramatic, Mom," Amanda called after me. That evening, Amanda called to inform me they were re-evaluating the family home. "It's really too large for just one person," she said, "and the maintenance costs are excessive." "This house is not part of the company assets," I reminded her. "Your father left it to me specifically." "Well, technically it's part of the estate," she countered. "And as the majority shareholders, we have some say in how assets are utilized." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. I called Thomas immediately but got his voicemail. I then tried to reach James Wilson, but his secretary informed me he was on vacation. 2 days later, the worst happened. It was pouring rain, one of those fierce New England storms that rattle the windows. I was making tea in the kitchen when I heard a car pull up. Looking out, I saw Daniel's Range Rover and Jackson's Mercedes. The doorbell rang insistently. When I opened it, Daniel Jackson and 2 men I didn't recognize stood on the porch. "Mom, we need to talk," Daniel said, pushing past me into the foyer. "What's going on?" I asked, noticing the grim expressions. "We've made a decision about the house," Daniel said. "It's being prepared for sale starting tomorrow." "That's not possible," I protested. "Harold's will specifically states, 'We've had the will reviewed by our new legal team. Jackson interrupted. "There are provisions that allow for liquidation of assets if it benefits the company." "That's simply not true," I insisted. One of the strangers stepped forward. "Mrs. Harrington, I'm Kevin Matthews from Boston Security. We've been hired to oversee the transition of property." "Transition, this is my home." "Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be," Amanda said from the doorway. I hadn't even noticed her arrival. "We've arranged a very nice senior apartment for you." "Senior apartment," I repeated in disbelief. "I'm 67, not 97. "The locks are being changed tonight," Daniel said flatly. "We've packed your essentials." For the first time, I noticed the suitcases in the hallway. They had packed my things without my knowledge, without my consent. "You can't be serious," I whispered. "It's for the best," Amanda said, not quite meeting my eyes. "The house is being staged for sale and your clutter would need to be removed anyway." "My clutter, you mean my life, my memories with your father." "Mrs. Harrington, I need to ask you to leave the premises," Kevin said formally. "No." I stood my ground. "This is illegal. This is my home." Daniel's face hardened. "Mom, don't force us to involve the police. We have documentation." "What documentation could possibly allow you to throw your mother out of her own home?" No one answered. Instead, Jackson and Kevin began moving my suitcases onto the porch into the pouring rain. "Stop this!" I cried. "You can't do this." "It's done, Mom," Amanda said coldly. "The company needs the liquidity from this property. Business decisions aren't personal." "Throwing your mother out into a rainstorm seems pretty personal to me," I retorted. Kevin cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mrs. Harrington, I have to insist you leave now." I looked at my children, these strangers wearing the faces of the babies I had nursed, the toddlers, whose tears I had wiped away, the teenagers I had guided through heartbreaks and triumphs. "Your father would be ashamed of you both," I said quietly. Daniel flinched, but Amanda rolled her eyes. "Dad would understand business necessities." With as much dignity as I could muster, I put on my coat, took my purse, and walked out onto the porch. My suitcases were already soaked through. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. Daniel handed me a piece of paper. "The address of the senior living facility. It's all arranged." And with that, they closed the door on me. I heard the new locks being engaged. I stood in the pouring rain, homeless, betrayed by my own flesh and blood. 67 years old, and everything I had built with Harold was being stripped away by the children we had raised together. I had no idea what to do next. I couldn't see through my tears and the rain. I didn't even know how I would transport my soaking luggage. As I stood there, paralyzed by shock and grief, another car pulled into the driveway. Thomas stepped out, took one look at me standing in the rain with my luggage, and understood immediately. "Oh, Effie," he said, hurrying to my side with an umbrella. "Come with me, right now." And that was how I found myself homeless, sitting in Thomas and Laura's guest room, surrounded by hastily packed suitcases, wondering how my life had fallen apart so completely. The first night at Thomas and Laura's home, I couldn't stop shaking. The betrayal was too enormous to process. Laura brought me tea, sat with me until dawn as I cycled through shock, grief, and rage. How could they? I kept asking. They're my children. I changed their diapers. I taught them to read. I loved them unconditionally. "Money changes people," Laura said softly. "Or perhaps it just reveals who they truly are." The next morning, Thomas came into the guest room with a serious expression. "Effie, there's something you need to know. Something Harold wanted me to tell you if something like this happened." I looked up in surprise. "What do you mean, if something like this happened?" Harold anticipated his own children turning against me. Thomas sat heavily on the edge of the bed. "Harold was a brilliant businessman because he saw patterns clearly. He noticed how Daniel and Amanda were changing as the company grew more successful. He worried about their values, about what they might do when he was gone. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written in Harold's familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter and a small USB drive. "My dearest Effie," the letter began. "If you're reading this, then my worst fears about our children have come true. I've tried to guide them to instill in them the values we share, but I've watched them change. Money and power have begun to corrupt them. I pray this letter is unnecessary, that they'll prove me wrong. But if not, Thomas has instructions to give you this when you need it." The letter explained that while Daniel and Amanda thought they controlled the company through their combined 80% ownership, the reality was more complex. Harold had created a parent company years earlier, and that company held controlling interest in Harrington Tech Solutions. My 20% wasn't just ordinary shares. They were special class shares with veto power. "You hold the real power, Effie," Harold had written. "I structured it this way because I trust you to do what's right, not just what's profitable. The USB drive contains all the legal documentation and instructions. Thomas knows which attorneys to contact." I looked up at Thomas in astonishment. "Is this true? Can I really stop them?" "Not just stop them," Thomas said grimly. "You can take back control entirely if necessary. The documentation is ironclad. Harold made sure of it." That day we contacted Sarah Martinez, an attorney Thomas trusted, who specialized in corporate governance. She reviewed the documents and confirmed what Harold's letter had claimed. "Mrs. Harrington, your late husband was very clever," Sarah said. "Your children think they've outmaneuvered you, but they have no idea who really holds the cards." "I don't want to hurt them," I said quietly. "They're still my children." "With respect," Sarah replied, "they didn't show you the same consideration, and from what Thomas tells me, they're making decisions that could damage the company irreparably." Over the next few days, I began gathering information. Thomas introduced me to Sofia Rodriguez, the former chief financial officer, who had been pushed out by Daniel and replaced with one of Jennifer's friends. "They're making terrible decisions," Sofia told me over coffee. "Leveraging the company for high-risk investments, alienating long-term clients with aggressive new terms." "Harold built those client relationships over decades," I said. "I know." Sofia nodded. "Several major clients have already moved their business elsewhere. They told me they didn't recognize the company anymore." I also learned that Daniel and Amanda had fired many long-term employees, people who had been loyal to Harold for years. Some had been with us since the garage days. Those employees were replaced with friends of Jennifer and Jackson, people with flashy resumes but little substance. "The company culture has become toxic," Sofia explained. "It's all about short-term profits now. The innovation that made Harrington special is dying." With Sarah's help, I began contacting board members and key investors discreetly. Many were disturbed by the direction Daniel and Amanda were taking the company, but felt powerless to stop it. "We thought you approved of these changes," one board member told me. "They said you wanted to step back from business matters." Nothing could be further from the truth, I assured him. Thomas provided crucial financial information. The company was starting to struggle under my children's leadership. Their aggressive expansion was financed with dangerous levels of debt. Client retention was falling. Employee turnover was at an all-time high. Most disturbing was what we discovered about Jennifer. She had established shell companies that were receiving large consulting fees from Harrington Tech. Essentially, she was siphoning money from the company into her personal accounts with Daniel's knowledge or perhaps his willful blindness. "This could be criminal," Sarah warned me. "If nothing else, it's a clear breach of fiduciary duty." The final piece fell into place when a financial journalist called me. He was working on a story about the troubling changes at Harrington Tech Solutions since Harold's death. The stock price had dropped 30%. Industry analysts were questioning the company's stability. "I'd like to get your perspective," the journalist said, "as the founder's widow." I thanked him for his interest, but asked for a few days before commenting. It was time to act. "Set up the board meeting," I told Sarah. "It's time to reveal the truth." The emergency board meeting was called for 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 3 months after the night I was thrown out of my home. Sarah made the arrangements invoking rarely used bylaws that allowed for special meetings under extraordinary circumstances. Daniel and Amanda arrived late, clearly annoyed at having their schedules disrupted. Jennifer trailed behind them, though she had no official standing to attend. I was already seated at the head of the table with Thomas and Sarah flanking me. "Mom," Daniel looked surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I called this meeting," I said calmly. Amanda laughed. "You can't call a board meeting. You're a minority shareholder." Sarah slid folders to each board member. "Actually, Mrs. Harrington has that authority, and more, as you're about to learn." As the board members reviewed the documents, Daniel's face drained of color. Amanda flipped frantically through the pages. "This isn't possible," she whispered. "It's not just possible," I said. "It's the truth. Your father anticipated that you might be tempted to misuse your inheritance. He created safeguards." The documentation revealed the parent company structure and my controlling interest. It also detailed the financial mismanagement that had occurred under Daniel and Amanda's leadership. "The company has lost 30% of its value in 3 months," I pointed out. "Key clients have departed, valuable employees have been pushed out, and most seriously, company funds have been diverted to private accounts." Jennifer stood up suddenly. "This is ridiculous. You're just a bitter old woman who can't accept that her children are more capable than she is." Thomas placed a USB drive on the table. "This contains records of transfers from Harrington Tech to shell companies controlled by Jennifer Davis. Over $2 million in 3 months." The board members looked stunned. One of them, a longtime friend of Harold's, turned to Daniel. "Is this true?" Daniel couldn't meet his eyes. "The transfers were for legitimate marketing services." "From companies that didn't exist 6 months ago," Thomas challenged. "Companies with no employees and no physical address." Jennifer grabbed her purse. "I don't have to listen to these accusations." "Actually," Sarah interjected, "you might want to stay. The FBI has been notified about the suspicious transfers. They'll have questions." Jennifer paled, looked frantically at Daniel, then fled the room. Amanda was on the verge of tears. "Mom, you don't understand. We were trying to modernize the company. By throwing me out into the rain, by selling my home, by betraying everything your father built. We made mistakes." Daniel admitted, his voice barely audible. "We got carried away." "Carried away?" I repeated. "You conspired to take everything from me. You treated me like I was nothing." The board voted unanimously to restore me to the position of chairwoman. Daniel and Amanda were removed from their executive roles, pending a full investigation of the financial improprieties. As the meeting concluded, my children approached me hesitantly. "What happens now?" Amanda asked, tears streaming down her face. "That depends on you," I replied. "Are you pressing charges?" Daniel's voice shook. "I haven't decided," I answered truthfully. "Mom, please." Amanda fell to her knees beside my chair. "We're so sorry. We got caught up in the money and the power. Jennifer and Jackson kept pushing us to take more control." "Don't blame others for your choices," I said firmly. Daniel knelt on my other side. "We were wrong. Terribly wrong. Please, Mom, give us a chance to make it right." I looked at my children, now humbled and afraid. "If you want redemption, you'll have to earn it." "Anything," they both said, almost in unison. "You'll start at the bottom," I told them. "Daniel, you'll work in the customer service department. Amanda, you'll join the product development team as an assistant. You'll learn the business from the ground up, the way your father and I did. You'll work with the people you fired, apologize to them, learn from them." "For how long?" Amanda asked. "As long as it takes to prove yourselves trustworthy again. Years, most likely." They nodded, accepting their fate. "And the house?" Daniel asked quietly. "I'll be moving back in today. Thomas has already arranged for the locks to be changed back." As Daniel and Amanda left the boardroom, shoulders slumped in defeat, Thomas turned to me. "Harold would be proud of you, Effie. You stood your ground." "He would be heartbroken about the children," I replied. "Perhaps, but they have a chance to learn now, a chance to become better people." That afternoon I returned to my home, the home Harold and I had shared for decades. The staging for sale had already begun. Many of my personal items had been boxed up or removed. Family photos had been replaced with generic artwork. It felt sterile, unloved. "We'll get it back to normal," Laura assured me, helping me unpack. In the following weeks, I worked with Thomas and Sophia to stabilize the company. We reached out to clients who had left, rebuilding those relationships one meeting at a time. We rehired key employees who had been let go. Most importantly, we recommitted to Harold's vision of ethical business practices. Daniel and Amanda struggled in their new roles. Amanda's husband, Jackson, left her when he realized she was no longer a shortcut to wealth and status. "I married an executive, not a glorified secretary," were his parting words. Jennifer disappeared after the FBI began investigating the financial transfers. Daniel was devastated at first, then gradually came to recognize how she had manipulated him. 3 months after regaining control of the company, I invited Daniel and Amanda to dinner at the house. They arrived separately, both nervous and subdued. "How's customer service?" I asked Daniel as we ate. "Humbling," he admitted. "I had no idea how hard those people work, how much abuse they take from clients." "And product development?" I asked Amanda. "Enlightening," she said. "The developers are brilliant. I never appreciated how much creativity goes into what we do." After dinner, we sat in the living room, the same room where we'd gathered for family game nights when they were children. "I've been thinking about what happened," I told them, "about how money changed you both." "It wasn't just the money," Amanda said softly. "It was thinking we deserved it somehow, that we were entitled to it." "We forgot everything you and Dad taught us," Daniel added, "about working hard, about earning respect." "Your father built his company on relationships and trust," I said. "Not just business relationships, but family ones too. He trusted you both with his legacy, and you betrayed that trust." They lowered their heads in shame. "But," I continued, "he also believed in second chances, in redemption." I told them about a new foundation I was establishing in Harold's name. The Harold Harrington Foundation would provide education and support for families of entrepreneurs, teaching them how to handle wealth responsibly. "I want you both involved," I said. "Not running it, but contributing, sharing what you've learned about the dangers of entitlement and greed." "You'd trust us with that?" Amanda asked, wiping away tears. "I'm giving you the opportunity to earn back trust," I clarified. "It's not the same thing." We talked late into the night. There were tears, confessions, tentative steps toward healing. The damage they'd done couldn't be erased, but perhaps with time and effort, it could be repaired. 6 months later, the company had recovered much of its value. Daniel and Amanda continued working in their entry-level positions, learning humility and respect. Occasionally, they joined me for family dinner. It wasn't the same as before. It never could be. But it was something new, something hopeful. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, something Harold and I used to do every summer evening, Amanda asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. "Mom, how did you find the strength to forgive us after what we did?" I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's not saying what happened was okay. It's choosing to move forward without being consumed by bitterness. "But we were so cruel," Daniel said. "Yes, you were," I agreed. "And there were moments I wanted to wash my hands of you both. But you're still my children. And more importantly, You're still capable of change, of growth. That's what matters. The company continues to thrive under a philosophy of balanced growth and ethical practices. Daniel and Amanda are slowly working their way up from the bottom, earning each promotion through genuine effort. The foundation helps families navigate the complicated emotions that come with wealth and succession. As for me, I've found a new purpose in mentoring young entrepreneurs, particularly women who are entering male-dominated fields. I share Harold's wisdom and my own hard-won insights. Sometimes when I'm alone in the house, I talk to Harold as if he were still here. I tell him about the children's progress, about the company, about the lessons I've learned. "You were right to worry," I say to his photograph. "But you were also right to believe they could be better." What I've come to understand is that sometimes we have to lose everything to recognize what truly matters. And sometimes the most profound act of love is standing firm, holding others accountable, and giving them the chance to become better people even when it's painful. For my children, that painful lesson came in the form of consequences they never expected from their pushover mother. For me, it came in the rain outside my own home, betrayed by the people I loved most. But here we are, rebuilding something new from the ruins of what was lost. It isn't perfect, it isn't what Harold and I dreamed of for our family, but it's real, and it's honest, and perhaps that's more valuable than the fairy tale we thought we were creating. Sometimes I wonder what you would do if faced with betrayal from those closest to you. Would you have the strength to hold them accountable? The compassion to offer redemption? If this story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found value in my journey, please subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself can be the greatest act of love. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in the integrity with which we live our lives.